welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support anyone going through a relationship breakdown and all of the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Lisa Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Liz Grimshaw, co-founder of Revival Financial Planning. So welcome to Stowe Talks, Liz. It's lovely to have you with us today. Do you want to just start by letting our listeners know a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks for inviting me along. So I worked in the city quite a number of years and then retrained as an advisor in the last 7 years. And then met my business partner, Jenny, and we both had an interest in helping women understand finance. We're both from divorced families. We both had quite a few friends that were going through divorce. And quite often it was women that didn't understand the finances in a traditional partnership. It's not always the case, but that's what we're finding kind of more and more. So we decided to set up a little offshoot, as well as doing general financial planning. We would help people going through divorce understand what settlement might look like, what it'd mean to not have any pension share, that kind of thing. So we set up a little offshoot and called it Revival. And now we have moved on our own. We still do general financial planning as well, but our focus area is helping those go through divorce. In general, our clients are mainly women, maybe 65%, something like that. But actually, we also support a lot of men. It's not just women.
So why is it so important that people should, be able to manage their money properly during and post-divorce? What are the differences between finances during post-divorce and kind of normal, in inverted commas, times, non-divorce times?
So in quite a lot of relationships, the males have managed the money, not always. And, it's getting more and more that there's perhaps a 50-50 share in salary, but quite a lot of the time, finances have been managed by the males, and the women haven't got a clue how much their outgoings are. And for the first time in their life, sometimes these women are mid-50s. They've never had to manage mortgage, bills, holidays, everything that comes with running a home. Whilst they've run the home, they've just been given access to a sum every month and been able to run it, but they've no idea actually what the overall costs are. Trying to educate them on that and put a budget together is very important for them, because for the first time in 30 years, they're going to have to run a household themselves and understand, I've got X amount as my settlement and I need to make this last.
What are the biggest challenges that you come across, or the biggest worries, if you like, when people first sit down? What is it that they, those initial appointments, they're going to ask for lots of different things. What are the main things that you hear from people?
Thinking that they're going to run out of money. Have I got enough? They were married to somebody that's got a big salary, and then now they're only going to have X. Educating them that, things are going to be different, because things are different post-divorce. It's not going to be the same. However, this is what you've got to work with. So this is the range that you can probably buy a house with. This is what you're going to be able to spend. And for those that are a bit older, that are then drawing from their pension, looking at how much that pot is, we kind of model that up to 90 or 99. So it's a long lifespan for a conservative view of what they can spend on a monthly basis going forward.
Those conversations can't be easy. If you're saying to someone, someone's saying, I don't know, how's this going to stretch? How I'm going to get by? And you're saying, okay, so tell me what your situation is. Maybe they're thinking of buying a property for, £600,000, let's say. And you look at the figures and say, I'm not sure that's affordable. That can be tricky, because people have got ideas for what life's going to look like. And how do you go through that process of saying to someone, okay, we might need to do some cloth cutting here?
Yeah, it's difficult. And that kind of realization setting in, and it takes quite a few meetings at first. It's difficult because, like you say, they think they're going to have a house for X, but actually the realism is it might not be the case. So running through that, and we use cash flow modeling to show people, like, well, okay, if you want to buy a house for £600,000, that's okay, but it may mean that if you want to carry on spending at the level that you're at, in 10 years you're going to have to downsize to help top up that pot, or you're going to have to go out to work. And having those conversations is, life isn't going to be the same again. These are your options, and these are the different things that you can do. If spending X per month or having a house for X is the biggest priority, then let's look at how we can structure to make that work.
When you do that and you go through the cash flow planning with them, and they've had a really clear idea of something, but you've kind of given them these different options, can you almost see it ticking away where they're thinking about, do you feel like they're often very stuck in their ways, or actually are they quite easy once you set out how life could look in various different circumstances? that they then start to very easily move into, oh, okay, there are other options?
Yeah, I think initially they're stuck in their ways, like, well, no, I've always spent this. And, particularly some of the London clients that have been used to a lot of money per month and a big house, and that realization of you're not going to get that. There's not enough in the pot for you to have that. So let's work with what you've got, and it's going to be okay. Perhaps you have a smaller place and then you've got more money for the holidays and things that you want to do. Or if you want a bit of a bigger place, then you're going to have to downsize. There are different ways that you can cut it. But quite often it takes a few meetings and a few different models and scenarios that you're running to say, well, it is going to be okay, but you're going to have to work out what your priorities are.
And then how good are people actually sticking to those plans? Because I think that to a degree, people kind of feel, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like my perception is people kind of feel that it's a fairly fixed aspect of their personalities, how they are with money. I'm a spender. I'm a saver. People kind of have one approach. And I know when I've just been speaking with mates about it, people say, oh, I'm good with money or I'm rubbish with money. People kind of have like the thing of like, oh, I couldn't change. And probably then if you've got someone who is, let's say, probably the more common way around, people are like, well, I'm a bit of a spender. I'm not great at saving money. You say to them, well, if you want to achieve the things in life you want to achieve, you're going to have to change. That's really difficult for that sort of behavior change to change your mindset with money, isn't it? It must be really hard for people.
Yeah, and I think over a period of time, what's really nice is seeing the clients change, particularly if they were really nervous about, even if they were stuck in their ways and had a fixed idea of how much money they needed per month and the kind of house they were going to live in and their, continued lifestyle. Actually, once they've got their head around it a bit and they're managing their own pot, obviously with our help, it's quite empowering for them because for the first time in their life, they're actually in control, and when perhaps they haven't been for the last 20 or 30 years. So that's a nice place to be, and seeing that shift in kind of their mental state, really, because a lot of them aren't in a good place when we first come to see them, and then taking them on that journey to get in the settlement and saying, this is what you're going to have to spend. And in the early days, we'll do annual reviews, but we see people more than that in the early days just to try and help them along.
There's been quite a lot of research in relation to pensions and the number of pension orders that are in financial orders in comparison to the number of financial orders that are made by the courts. And it's certainly not uncommon for me, and Matt will say whether or not he finds the same, that often, stereotypically, the wife will prioritise the family home over a pension share. What are your, you work predominantly with women who are going through divorce proceedings. I'm sure you've got some strong feelings on that. And what would your advice be to somebody about the pension sharing aspect of a divorce?
To look at the modelling and see what that does in retirement, because obviously sometimes there isn't an option. They need that that value offset because they want the family home, but perhaps they're younger and the children are younger, and that is the priority right now. But we'll say to them, well, look, a bit further down the line, you're probably going to have to downsize unless you go back to a full-time job once the kids are a bit older. And we'll show the different scenarios to say, if you take no pension and you don't go back to work and you don't downsize, this is your shortfall in retirement. And living on a state pension is going to be tough after the lifestyle you've been used to. However, and then we'll run the different scenarios. These are the things that you can do. Go back to work, downsize at 55 or whatever. Because you do need some income for retire. It's okay having money now, and you're here now, and now's the priority. But you do need to think about the future, and not having any pension share, that's not a strong position to be in.
When you're having these conversations with clients, what sort of stage do you tend to be at? So, you've got your divorce, presumably divorce is up and running, people are going through it, or maybe going through disclosure, whether it's court process or through solicitors. Is it at that stage, is it a fairly early stage and they're doing the planning piece and presumably that's better? Do you get people who are like literally coming to you and going, oh, I've just had this offer, how does it look for me? What's the most common thing you see and what's best for clients in terms of them being able to plan stuff properly?
So good question. There's a real mix. Our preferred option is in the early stages. So in the early stages when people are perhaps just looking at what's in the overall pot and doing their financial disclosure. And then we normally have a 3-way conversation with the client and the solicitor to say, well, what's realistic here? Is maintenance realistic? Is it a bit more than 50-50? What, in this scenario, because as you know, all clients' situations are different. So we would rather get involved at the beginning so that we can help with that negotiation of settlement and doing that modelling to help you as a solicitor as well, help negotiate that part. Often, though, it doesn't always work like that. And some clients come to us at the end. Once the pot's negotiated and it's done, they say, what can I do with this? Can you help me plan my retirement, or help me fund how am I going to buy a house, or in between? So sometimes it's right in the mix when they're trying to finalise. We've also done things like being on call at FDRs. So, and if we've perhaps put a model together and then the solicitor said to us, could you be on call during the FDR? Because we might have an offer from the other side that we'd like you to model just to see if we can settle this afternoon. So we've done that a few times as well, and that's been helpful.
Yeah, really useful to be able to stress test an offer live. I mean, I've done that a few times, and I think it's really, really helpful to be able to look at the impact on that, because you can see the headline figures. It's normally pretty easy to kind of imagine what the next couple of years looks like, but it can become a lot more variable. And obviously, if you're dealing with things, hidden factors behind the offer, so a hidden factor being something like your client does have a sort of intention to downsize at some point, and that's not going to figure in the negotiations. And it's unlikely that that's going to be a big part and parcel of the negotiations. But to be able to kind of model that and go, okay, what's the actual impact of that, rather than working in typically our very broad brush terms of looking at whatever percentage split or whatever kind of quantum of maintenance you're looking at. I think that can be a really useful thing. I mean, Lisa, is that something that you get involved with your clients and having those sort of three-way conversations? How does that help out people you're representing?
Yeah, it's really helpful. It's really nice sometimes to get the financial advisor in the office with the client, sit down round the table. We can be talking about kind of, particularly if we've got needs cases. So we're looking at meeting housing needs and income needs, and we're calculating what those will look like. It's really helpful. It's also really helpful from that affordability perspective. Often before certain hearings, etc., you have to produce sort of property particulars. So if you're saying, so that you can say what your housing need is, and you go on Rightmove and you kind of go to the area that you think you'd like to live in or need to live in and put in a range of prices, and you produce properties that you think would be suitable. But we all have wants, and then there's needs. Like, we can all go onto Rightmove and pick all of these lovely houses that we would like to live in, but that doesn't mean that we can actually afford to live in them. And I think that's what's really important in having those three-ways conversations, is that we can look at the legal side of it and what we need to produce and what will be taken into account, but it's actually having that realistic financial advice that the client's getting, which we can't give as lawyers, as to actually that just won't work, if you like. That's not going to meet all of these objectives that you've told me that you want to meet, and therefore we need to be looking at something else. And it's much better to pick that up with a client early and manage those expectations and have those conversations really early, rather than getting to the end where we've got a settlement in place and then they go to a financial advisor and discover that they can't quite live the way that they wanted to.
Sure. And I think as well, in some of the cases where there's hefty maintenance, perhaps they may look at a bigger property than and kind of making them aware that once that maintenance drops off, you've still got to be able to afford those mortgage payments, or if there's a small mortgage, but you've still got to be able to run that house. So be mindful of how long that maintenance is going to last, and whether you can afford to live in X house, even though you might want to. You might be better off just adjusting that slightly.
Is there a sort of a sort of number one headline mistake or pitfall that you see crop up time and time again that you kind of want to scream at the general population and say, don't do this or do this? What is everyone getting wrong when they're dealing with the finances on divorce?
I don't think there's one particular thing. I think sometimes people think they can manage it themselves, but then they some people think they can just stick the settlement in the bank and they'll just take a little bit each month instead of thinking, well, if I invest it, this is the difference. And I think a lot of people don't have that education around finance, that if you invest the money, it will last longer, and think, so I don't need an advisor, I can do it. And, whereas statistics show that if you've got an advisor in advising you in the first place and then helping you invest it and look after it, it lasts a lot longer.
I think sometimes there's a difficulty in clients understanding, and sometimes this happens with legal advice as well, in understanding that, yes, there's a cost for this advice, but you're going to get it back. And I've had plenty of clients who walk away with, decent sums, and literally just put it in the bank. And I'm saying, go and speak to someone, and hopefully they do, but you can't make them. And you just think, you're basically leaving cash on the table there that you really, in a lot of cases, need to do it. But I think there's also, the difficult thing probably goes back to the timing of when to get involved, especially at the end of proceedings. Clients are so fed up of getting advice. They're so bored of hearing from me. I mean, they're so bored of hearing from me after first meeting, but that's particular to me. They're so fed up of paying the bills and paying the legals, and they just want it over with, and you just want to have to not think for a bit, which I get, but that can have a bit of a sting in the tail, I think.
Yeah, and we do hear that too. I've got solicitors' fees, and sometimes they're having coaching as well, and sometimes I've had to get a litigation loan until the house sells, or that kind of. So one of the good things about advice is if they're looking at the modelling, but there is a pension share or an investment at the end, our fees can be taken at the end. So we can do all of that work. Sometimes we're 18 months down the line before the fee comes through, because you've helped them negotiate the settlement. Once the pension share's through, you take your fee at the end. So actually, once they know that, it's a bit easier for them, because they're not actually having to pay out another invoice. I
mean, that definitely helps at a time when money's going out and not enough money's coming in, is generally the way it works during the divorce. So, and what about if they've gone through all that and, they've got the settlement, they've got the money, they've done what they're told, they've taken the advice, they've got the money invested, they feel like they have the plan. What then? What does starting again after divorce with finances look like? Because that's a big, for a lot of people, especially if they're not, money minded, they've not maybe managed the finances, like you said, it must be a big psychological hill to climb, I guess, to start again from scratch and manage your money properly.
Yeah, and some clients need more help than others, for sure. And sometimes we'll go right to the basics of saying to them, right, we'll put all your direct debits in one account, and they're all your must pays every month. Let's add them up. And sometimes we'll spend that time with them and go and meet them and, run through that, which is kind of, we wouldn't need to do that with everyone, but some clients need that initially. Do that with your direct debits and your food. So they're the things that you can't miss. You can't miss that mortgage payment. You can't miss your electricity bill. They're the things that have to come out first. And then these are your other pots, and kind of giving them that guidance. And sometimes it takes a little while, but in general, they then pick up. And then, like I was saying earlier, they actually like that empowerment. Right, okay, I've got this and I've made it work, and I've actually got enough in the pot to go on holiday. And it's good. But it takes a while. It takes longer for some than others, for sure.
Do you think that part of the education piece stems from the fact that we're maybe not great at talking about money? Is that it's still, often the taboo, you don't talk about your money, and the education that maybe kids get in school about the practical aspects of money, there's lots of people would say it's a bit lacking. Does that play into it, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think people bury their head in the sand, and particularly if they've not been used to running it, they've just been like, well, it's their job. I just know what I need to do every month for the supermarket and the kids and this, that, and, you don't have to make those plans. So, yeah, I think that people aren't educated enough on money. I've definitely pushed with schools to educate children more around, it's all right doing all of the 10 GCSE subjects, but actually you should be teaching them what's a mortgage, how do I get one. And I think that's coming through. I've got teenage children, and they're saying that in some of their PSHE lessons now, they are telling them, don't get into debt. Credit cards are all right, but they're supposed to be for emergencies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I could have done with that lesson.
Yeah. Me too. When I was a student, definitely.
I mean, just last week for me. Yeah. It's that speaks volumes. It speaks volumes about me rather than the education system, right?
So, for somebody that's going through a divorce, then, that is in the fairly early stages, perhaps they have just separated, one party may have moved out, they've moved into rental property, let's say, and they're really struggling to make ends meet. We've taken income that's going into one household expenditure, and we're now trying to split that between two. I suppose, firstly, to Matt, from a legal perspective, is there any avenues that they can take to be able to get some assistance? And then perhaps if we can come over to Liz for if you've got any practical tips and advice for how they could manage their money in that situation.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, if there's simply not enough money to go around, you can't create money. Short of making sure that you're doing the sort of some of the, again, can you increase your hours at work? Is there actual work you can take on to increase your income? Are there any benefits that you may be entitled to if you're not living with your partner. If you are moving out and you're a single occupant, you get a 25% discount on your council tax. Go through your bills. If you've got any insurance policies that are up for renewal that you can reduce money on, and kind of do those kind of basic kind of money saving kind of tips, and looking at, is there any way of increasing income? If your situation's slightly different and you've moved out, or your ex has moved out, and you aren't the breadwinner and you are struggling with the money that you have, but your ex is probably okay, there are certain applications that you can look at. Something called MPS is called Maintenance Pending Suit, where you can apply for an LSPO, loving our incomprehensible acronyms, a Legal Services Payment Order. And what they are basically orders that the court can make to require your partner to pay you money to ensure that you can meet your basic interim needs and or your legal fees. You can make those applications. Commonly, they should be settled out. Like, you don't want to be spending money on court fees arguing about who pays the court fees. That is not sensible, but sometimes unavoidable. But quite often they can be sorted outside of court and reaching the interim arrangement, just holding position. What you've got to bear in mind is that is not going to be the same as during the marriage. So the fact that you went on 3 holidays last year does not mean that there is an expectation that you would necessarily have the money to go on 3 holidays this year. You might not be able to go on holiday at all. It depends on the facts and things. So there's stuff that can be done legally. There's stuff that can be done practically. I mean, Liz, when you've got clients who are, you need to maybe look at the long-term stuff and what their lives might look like in the future, but it's quite difficult for them to see, 3 years down the line, because they're looking 3 months down the line and going, crikey, how am I paying the bills? How do those conversations work, and what can you help out clients with there?
Yeah, so if we've been involved from the beginning, we can look at an interim budget, and often we do that when we're running our scenarios, because that interim period might be, waiting for a house to sell, or if they've only just started negotiations, then actually that interim period might be a bit longer in some people's cases. So we'll look at, okay, there's X coming in at the minute, or you've perhaps had some kind of loan or maintenance, interim maintenance order that will help. So again, helping them look at how they can cut costs. You might have to stop the gym membership and all those kind of things just for now, or find a cheaper one in that interim period, and then looking at the longer term one as well. So yeah, we'll often run 2 different scenarios, and often there'll be 2 budgets as well. There'll be an interim one that's for the next few months, and then one that's post-settlement.
And that often reflects what we do in proceedings, or in negotiations, where we will, if our client is saying, I need the extra money from my ex, you might prepare an interim budget, but that should always look pretty different to a long-term budget. It's going to be less. There's going to be an acknowledgement that you need to cut your cloth more in the short term, generally, until after the point at which the house is sold, or whatever happens, that maybe realizes some cash, reduces overall expenditure, and the finances aren't so intermingled. So I think it'd be really good to finish with, just as a way of recap, and as a nice little summary for people, for anyone going through divorce, or perhaps just gone through it and is just slightly concerned or struggling with managing their money. What are your top tips and the things that they should be looking to do or not to do?
Get some advice. Most financial advisors will give you a free hour initial chat. And in that hour, you can get some good pointers in terms of budgeting for the interim and the long term, and just giving you a steer. So I would definitely advise anyone to do that. Listen to an advisor. Don't get too many of your friends involved. Lots of people have got lots of different advice, but their situation's different. So concentrate on your situation. Just because they did X doesn't mean to say that that's going to be right for you. So take the advice of your solicitor, your advisor, work with them in a trio, and be adaptable, because life isn't going to be the same. It's going to be different.
Perfect. So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about the work Liz does at Revival Financial Planning, and booking a session with Liz or her co-founder Jenny on their website, revivalfp.co.uk. If you would like more information on our podcast, head over to stowetalks.co.uk, and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.